Before we unlock the future, we must find the keys to the past. I'm Leonard Nimoy. Join me and open the door to ancient mysteries beginning now. Human blood. The ancients believed that the scarlet liquid that courses through our veins was the most precious substance on earth. Because it was the very essence of life itself, they believed it to be the ultimate gift that anyone could offer to the gods. For millennia, some religions were based on the spilling of blood through the ritual of human sacrifice. Skeletons found in mass graves in North Africa reveal that thousands of infants and children were once sacrificed to the gods. In ancient Mexico, Aztec priests once cut the living hearts out of scores of victims in a single day. In Europe, bodies have been dragged from the damp earth, perfectly preserved in the sacrificial death throes that they suffered over 2,000 years ago. How did this bloody ritual originate? And why was the practice so prevalent in ancient times? Discover the dark legacy that once arose from a sacred bond between humans and the gods they worshipped, as we explore the ancient mysteries of human sacrifice. It is the dawn of history. A devout worshiper walks slowly up to an altar, prepared to forfeit his life. A priest symbolically raises a knife, then plunges it into the victim's chest. Blood freely flows. The assembled congregation chants joyously. A human life has been taken. The gods are pleased. Scenes like this occurred throughout history, for human sacrifice is one of the most ancient and widespread forms of worship.
Sacrifice really means that ritual action that makes an object, a person, a plant, an animal sacred. A human sacrifice is when a human person is killed and their body, their flesh, their blood, their bones are used in some ritual fashion to establish this relationship with a god or to restore a relationship with a god.
Ritual killing is different from criminal execution or from death in warfare. Often, the victims themselves went willingly to their deaths, certain in the belief that their blood would satisfy the reigning deity.
The whole idea of sacrifice is to give to the divine world a free and clear gift that cannot be retrieved. So sacrifice is a form of human inducement to try to get the gods to act in harmony with the human community's needs.
Why has human sacrifice, so repulsive to our modern sensibilities, remained a constant presence throughout human history? Why do the gods of mankind seem to demand ritual murder?
One of the main ingredients in a successful sacrifice is the blood. It is the blood of the victim. that provides the purification elements, which is what a sacrifice is often about. So in ancient Israel, the blood of the sacrificial animal would be splashed around the altar and rubbed on the horns of the altar. This provides a transfer of the life force which was in the animal to the cult object and ultimately to the deity. So it's really the blood that is the issue.
Of all the examples of human sacrifice in the ancient world, perhaps none is more disturbing than one found within the annals of the Holy Bible.
"Take your only son," God said unto Abraham, "and go to the land of Moriah, and there offer him as a burnt offering." Genesis 22:1.
In the classic story of Abraham and Isaac, the God of Israel demands the taking of a human life. The biblical passage is shrouded in mystery, for it depicts a God that seems to be at cross purposes with the traditional teachings of Judeo-Christian belief. God not only asks for human sacrifice, but commands Abraham to put his only son to death in order to prove his devotion. Indeed, human sacrifice was a customary religious practice for the Canaanites, neighbors of the land of Israel. They would often cast children into a pit of flames to satisfy their gods. But could this deadly practice have spread to the nearby Israelites?
We have a tradition that says that when the ancient states of Israel and Judah were under foreign rule, they began to adopt the practices of their Assyrian and Babylonian overlords. It may be that some of these practices included the sacrifice of children.
Kings of Judah have filled this place with the blood of innocent persons, and have built high places to Baal in order to burn their sons in the fire as burnt offerings to Baal. Jeremiah 19:5.
Who was Baal, the bloodthirsty god who demanded the lives of children? The Canaanites claimed him as their chief deity. When pagan beliefs finally gripped the Holy Land itself, the Israelites veered from their sacred covenant with God. Even the kings of Judah sacrificed children by burning them to appease Baal. Biblical prophets constantly condemned the bloody ritual. The books of Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Micah all speak out against the pagan practice, calling it an abomination. Yet if human sacrifice is indeed an abomination, why did God command Abraham to sacrifice his only son?
As Abraham put out his hand to grasp the knife to slay his son, the angel of the Lord called to him. "Do not lay your hands on the boy," he said, "for I know now that you revere God." Genesis 22:12.
Scholars insist that the story contains a deeper meaning, and that God demanded a human sacrifice precisely because he wanted to end the practice. For in the final moments of the drama, when Abraham is about to sacrifice his son, God stops him.
It may be, though, that this story is designed to end child sacrifice in Israel. It says, yes, we know that the people around us do these things. And there might have been a time when we could imagine God asking for the death of a child, but no more.
God is making the point to Abraham in the most dramatic way. That's not me. The kind of God that you expect and the kind that you're used to is not the kind of God that I am. I want the kind of sacrifice that you, Abraham, have given me, the sacrifice of obedience and of spirit, and not the kind of sacrifice of body that you think I want.
The lesson is learned by Abraham and his descendants, determining the course forever for the way in which the Jewish people will worship their God.
Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Though the Jewish faith had banned human sacrifice, the bloody rite would never fully disappear from history. Human sacrifice in the ancient world was not confined to the Mediterranean. In the heart of Western Europe, hundreds of perfectly preserved human corpses have been discovered deep in the swampy earth. In the cold, swampy wasteland of a Danish peat bog, a series of gruesome discoveries in modern times has led to a new understanding of ancient Europe. In 1950, workmen digging near the Danish town of Silkeborg uncovered the naked remains of a middle-aged man. The corpse's condition suggested that the victim had been brutally murdered and then quickly buried in the watery soil. Assuming that this must be the remains of a local citizen, the workmen called the police. Forensic experts were summoned. Within days, an autopsy revealed to the authorities that this was a murder they would be powerless to solve. For incredibly, the murder had been committed more than 2,000 years ago, at about the time of the birth of Jesus. The astonishing state of preservation of the ancient corpse was due to tannic acid leaching out of the peat moss, in effect tanning the skin to give it a strange leather-like quality. The oxygen-free depths of the bog also helped to preserve the corpse. At first, the find seemed unique. Soon, however, across Europe, from Ireland to Germany, more of the well-preserved ancient bodies began to be discovered. But why were these ancient corpses buried in the bogs of Europe? And more mysteriously, why did nearly all of the bodies suffer grotesque and brutal multiple wounds?
We have bog bodies that must have been hit with a club in the back of the head. And we also have some that have been strangled with a headband. The Graval man has got his throat cut from ear to ear, and before that he received a blow to his brain or his cranium. so there was a fracture there.
Scholars have concluded that the only reason for the multiple wounds, for beating, then hanging, then slashing the throat of a victim, would be for ritual purposes. The corpses from the bogs were victims of a sacrificial rite practiced 2,000 years ago. The swampy wastes of decaying vegetable matter known as bogs were once found throughout Europe. Desolate and bleak, with treacherous watery depths and slime that can easily swallow a man in an instant, the bog has been a place of myth and legend since ancient times.
People at that time believed that there was God.
People at that time believed there were gods or spirits out in these bogs. They believed if they're going to give some gift to the gods, it had to be placed out into the bog. Still into this century, people were convinced that out in the bogs there were some evil spirits, so nobody really dared to walk over a bog in the nighttime.
For archaeologists, the evidence seems clear. Human sacrifice was practiced in Northern Europe from at least 500 years before the Common Era to about the time of the birth of Jesus. But, unlike the human sacrifices of ancient Canaan and Judea, the Europeans left no written records of their reasons for ritual murder. Only recently have archaeologists confronted the mystery of the bog people. Why were they sacrificed? Who killed them? Using the tools of the modern crime lab, archaeologists must now play the role of criminologists if they are to ever unlock the mystery of the peat bog sacrifices. Through painstaking investigation and deductions, the archaeologists have pieced together a possible sequence of events. Prior to death, the victim was ritually prepared. Women have been found with their heads shaved. Many of the victims were found naked. From what scientists can surmise, the typical Northern Europe sacrifice culminated in a savage physical attack upon the victim. Forensic evidence shows that some bodies were severely battered long after death. They were then dumped in the lonely wasteland of the bog as a gift to local gods. We may never know why. The reason these men and women were sacrificed remains one of the great unresolved mysteries of archaeology.
We
We really don't know very much about the culture or religion of that time. Before that, we have the Bronze Age, and from there we have a lot of rock carvings that tell us about the religion of the time. But in the beginning of the Iron Age, we don't really know much about religion. The best thing we know is that there were human sacrifices into the bogs.
Perhaps if more ancient bodies are discovered in the bogs of Northern Europe, these questions may someday be answered. For now, all that remain are the eerie corpses, nearly 1,000 of them perfectly preserved for millennia. Mute testimony to an ancient sacrificial cult that defies our understanding. When the Spanish conquistadors first reached the New World in the 16th century, they discovered an astonishingly advanced civilization, the Aztecs of Mexico. Their capital city of Tenochtitlan featured towering pyramids and glittering palaces. This was a culture that had wrought an empire throughout much of North and Central America. But what fascinated the conquistadors more than all the wonders they witnessed was the Aztecs' practice of human sacrifice. For the Aztec, sacrifices were on a different scale than the ritual murders practiced in ancient Europe or Canaan. The Aztecs may well have offered the lives of more people to their gods than any other civilization in history. It is said that when the Great Temple was dedicated in 1487, priests sacrificed thousands of people in a single day. How could such an advanced civilization have practiced such a bloody ritual? Why did a highly spiritual culture of artists, craftsmen, and priests spill more blood for their gods than any other civilization in history?
One of the most impressive stereotypes about the Aztecs is that they were bloodthirsty. A short answer would be that their gods were fed by human blood. Blood was considered to be this essence of life, the most sacred fluid in the world, more sacred even than water. And human beings had received all of this life from the gods, and they asked a small portion back.
The Spanish were fascinated and horrified by the rituals they witnessed. In response, they massacred the Aztecs, tore down the great temple of Tenochtitlan, and built a cathedral in its place. Traditional Aztec worship was to be obliterated as the work of the devil. But the Aztecs themselves were equally appalled, because the Spaniards did not kill to please gods and to ensure good harvests. They killed indiscriminately, for conquest and for plunder. In the eyes of the Aztecs, to slay an enemy in battle was more of an abomination than human sacrifice. Yet why did the Aztec gods demand human sacrifice on a scale unprecedented in history? The question baffled the earliest Europeans to encounter the culture.
When the Spaniards came to the Aztec city of Tenochtitlan, one of the structures that really impressed them was called the Tzompantli. It was an enormous skull rack, and it had hundreds of skulls of sacrificed victims hanging on it.
The poles were separated from each other by a little less than a meter, and on each cross stick there were skulls impaled through the temple. We counted the cross sticks and found that there were 136,000 heads. Andrés de Tapia, Conquistador, 1519.
The Aztecs sacrificed to every member of their pantheon of gods, from the mighty feathered serpent god to the delicate butterfly goddess. The favorite place of Aztec sacrifice was the top of the pyramids. down whose carved steps human blood flowed and congealed as an offering to the gods. But bloodletting was not the only form of death.
There were a variety of methods of human sacrifice, including extraction of the human heart, drowning, stoning, decapitation, and the shooting with arrows. One of the most spectacular sacrifices was called the Feast of the Flaying of Men, in which enemy warriors were brought into the city and prepared for sacrifice. When they were defeated, when they were killed, their bodies were then taken to a special ritual area, and their skin was flayed from their bodies. The skin was then worn for a 20-day period by members of the captor's entourage.
This terracotta figure depicts a priest wearing the flayed skin of an enemy. The hands dangle at the wearer's wrist, and the victim's facial skin is worn as a mask. It was believed that the warrior wearing the skin of the slain victim would acquire godlike powers. The most common sacrificial victim was usually a captured warrior from another city-state. Some cities would even engage in mock battles with the sole purpose of capturing more victims for sacrifice. The doomed warriors gladly accepted their fates. Each year, a captive was selected for his handsome looks or muscular physique. Over the course of a year, the man was surrounded by luxury and taught to play the role of an Aztec god. He learned how to conduct himself with dignity and honor, and how to play the ritual flute of the gods. He was showered with attention, with beautiful clothes and precious jewels, becoming the most revered and honored man in the Aztec capital.
During the last 20 days of his life, he was provided with 4 women who were also goddesses, and they were allowed to have sexual relations in whatever abundance they wanted to have. At the end of this 20-day period, however, he was taken out of the city to the southern part of the lake of Mexico, where he was then sacrificed. According to the ritual description, he was to willingly go up the steps, praising the Aztec gods, and willfully giving himself over to the sacrifice.
Why did the sacrificial victims accept their deaths so peacefully? Their motivation seemed to be spiritual.
The ideal was to embrace this death, partly because of the reward that would come immediately upon being sacrificed. The reward for an Aztec enemy who was sacrificed was that they would immediately go to the heaven of the sun and accompany the sun daily on his triumphant passage through the sky.
Despite the many human sacrifices, the Aztec gods would provide scant protection. Ironically, the conquistadors and their priests put an end to the ritual of human sacrifice by slaughtering thousands of Aztec men, women, and children. Reports of human sacrifice continued to appear around the globe. India, timeless realm of ancient temples and sacred rivers, made famous by poets and travelers alike. This region would also contribute to the epic of human sacrifice in times gone by. Even the sacred scriptures of Hinduism, some of the oldest written texts in the world, speak of the demands of the gods for human flesh.
The sacrificer will slaughter a man first, for man is the first of all animals. Thus, he slaughters the victim according to its form and according to its excellence. The Shatapatha Veda.
These sacred Hindu texts, over 2,500 years old, have sparked controversy ever since they were first discovered by scholars in the West. For though the Vedas speak frequently of demands for human sacrifice, it is not clear how historically accurate these spiritual texts are.
I think the greatest mystery, to me at least, of human sacrifice in India is just asking oneself, how does one interpret the texts? How does one understand whether or not the texts are really speaking literally of human sacrifice or figuratively of human sacrifice? And I don't think we'll ever know.
Those who believe such ancient sacrifices took place point to disturbing accounts that began to surface in 19th century India. When the British Army arrived in India in the 1820s, officers reported stories of a cult of ritual murderers, bloodthirsty, roving bands of thieves who would prey on travelers, befriending them and then strangling them with a silken cord. They were called thugs, a Hindu word meaning deceiver, the root of the modern word thug. A thug's religious duty was to murder strangers in order to satisfy the bloodlust of the Hindu goddess Kali, who was imagined by the British in a devilish fashion.
Goddess Kali is a horrific, terrible, frightening goddess of war and death and violence. Kali is iconographically depicted with a very black tone of her skin. She is naked except for a girdle of human arms. She wears little fetuses as earrings, and she's basically a pretty mean-looking lady.
Little was known about the thugs in the outside world until the appearance of a book in 1827 by Captain William Sleeman of the British Army. He claimed to have discovered an entire cult dedicated solely to human sacrifice. Though only a low-ranking officer, Sleeman's announcement made him instantly famous throughout colonial India. He was appointed as a commissioner to destroy the thug cult But did Schliemann have an ulterior motive to exaggerate the menace of the tugs? It wasn't until nearly a century later that scholars began to carefully examine Schliemann's stories of the tugs. They found dramatic discrepancies in the accounts. Eventually, serious doubt was cast on the entire matter.
One of the interesting things about looking at the narratives of these soldiers who interrogated the people was people were terrified. People said, the reason why I confessed is because my children were taken hostage and I felt I had no other recourse. You have to wonder, is any of the testimony valid?
As time went on, it seemed that the whole macabre story had been concocted by Captain Schliemann to advance his career. Many historians today believe that those who were labeled as tugs may have simply been anti-British rebels, and the accusations of human sacrifice may merely have been a convenient excuse to put opposition leaders in jail. Yet there is more to the story of human sacrifice than simply discredited testimony about the cult of thugs. For stories of religious murder persist to this day.
I heard many rumors about human sacrifice while I was in India. One time I was having tea with the Panda, and he said, the priest, and he said, well, did you hear that a girl was sacrificed at Kaliko? He said that she had been found dressed in a red sari. She was decapitated. She had gold bangles, lots of jewelry. And the police were trying to hush it up.
Other reports of human sacrifice abound in modern-day India. Stories range from dubious tales of young girls rescued from murderous sex cults to newspaper accounts of young wives being set afire by their husbands. Yet India is clearly not the only culture to be fascinated by tales of modern human sacrifice.
I think that these rumors are very similar to the types of rumors that you get in the West. This idea that all these satanic rituals are occurring here in the United States, I think, is a continuation of our fascination for horror.
Are the accounts of ritual murder throughout history nothing more than lurid legends? New archaeological finds offer striking evidence to the contrary. Human sacrifice has held a central role in the pantheon of humanity's methods of worship. Yet there's one type of ritual murder that is considered the most horrible and is the most prevalent on Earth. That is the sacrifice of a child. Nowhere was the practice of child sacrifice more common than in the Mediterranean city-state of Carthage, a civilization which flourished at the same time as the Roman Empire. Carthaginians worshipped the god Baal, like their ancestors, the biblical Canaanites. But their form of worship was far bloodier than the rituals of the ancient Middle East.
It may be that tens of thousands of children were sacrificed. Maybe as many as 20,000 might have been sacrificed during the hard times of Carthage between, let's say, the 4th and 2nd century BC. It's incredibly eerie to be working even now in Carthage, and you see body after body coming out in front of you day after day. And it's very disturbing, especially when you're dealing with a small span of time and you see 200 or 300 infant remains, suggesting some kind of Holocaust occurring at a moment in time.
Why would a sophisticated and advanced culture like the Carthaginians murder their very own offspring?
In the ancient world, children were to some extent an expendable commodity. The rate of child mortality, of infant mortality, was incredibly high. So you couldn't allow yourself to become so attached to children until they were healthy enough so that you could take them, formally accept them into your family.
Could even a high rate of infant mortality justify the sacrifice of one's own child?
Human sacrifice ultimately is a wasteful procedure. Most parents feel rather great attachments to their children, so I can't imagine that this was a practice that parents fondly engaged in.
Carthaginian parents clearly had some emotional reaction to these difficult religious obligations, for history records that the priests of Baal played drums during their sacrifices in order to drown out the cries of the weeping mothers. What is it about human sacrifice that has made it so prevalent? Despite the emotional, ethical, and religious taboos against the practice since the times of the biblical prophets.
When you talk about human sacrifice, people want to pretend that it's a faraway thing. It's not relevant, it's not modern day. And the more you look into that reaction, you find out that people really feel connected in some way to the ritual killing of human beings.
Archaeological and historical evidence indicate that ritual murder was an integral component of religious activity in almost every part of the world. From the perspective of our own time, how harshly should we judge the practice of human sacrifice?
I think that human sacrifice ought to be demystified. We ought to stop thinking of it as a primal religious act and begin to understand it socially as a form of control by power elites who, after all, seldom sacrifice themselves. I think sacrifice is not much different from murder.
Is human sacrifice an obsolete stage of human spiritual evolution, or one which still lurks in the shadows of our consciousness? Whether carried out symbolically or literally, to avenge or appease, human sacrifice remains a forbidden undercurrent in the turbulent relationship between human beings and their gods. Even now, in some far-flung, little-known corner of the world, it is a ritual that may still perhaps be performed in secrecy and in silence.